Howard Solomon, leave the donor packet closed.
Those are EOBA records. Donations come through my office first.
The $50,000 television donation went into your personal
I
account.
move funds where I can manage them quickly.
This is Howard Solomon, Executive Director of the East Oakland Boxing Association, a non-profit built to protect kids in one of Oakland's most forgotten neighborhoods. What you're about to see is how he spent 5 years stealing from every single one of them.
You never told the board, and the kids never saw that money.
You're making cash flow sound like stealing from children.
He had just taken the check on national television. Stephen Curry had placed it in his hands, said the words, "Hopefully, it goes a long way, man," and the studio audience had applauded. $50,000. Delivered on the Ellen DeGeneres show, in front of millions of viewers, earmarked for the East Oakland children Solomon had spent years insisting he was fighting for. 6 weeks later, that entire $50,000 was sitting in a personal bank account with his name on it. Not the nonprofit's account. His. And that check was only one line item inside a $549,000 embezzlement scheme that federal investigators would spend the next several years quietly unraveling. Before we go any further, I have to ask, have you ever donated to a small nonprofit and just trusted that the money got where it was supposed to go? Drop a comment and tell me the last cause you gave to. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit the button. On this channel, we cover the people who exploit that trust for a living, and we don't let their stories get buried. Howard Solomon was born in Oakland, California in 1987. He grew up in the East Oakland Flats, in the shadow of the same streets that would eventually define both his career and his crimes. The neighborhood ran roughly from 73rd Avenue down through the Sobrante Park area, a stretch of the city that outsiders drove around rather than through. His mother worked shifts as a nursing assistant at Highland Hospital on East 31st Street. His father, when he was present, worked construction and later transitioned into occasional custodial work at a school in the Oakland Unified District. The household earned, on Solomon's own later telling to acquaintances, somewhere between $26,000 and $32,000 in a good year during his middle school years. Boxing entered his life at 11. There was a gym on Bancroft Avenue with a hand-painted sign and a heavy bag that hung from a chain older than most of the kids who hit it. The trainer, an older man who had fought amateur in the 1970s and never made the leap professional, took an interest in Solomon after watching him spar for a summer. Solomon was not a natural. He was measured, careful, defensive. He learned to slip a jab before he learned to throw one. That defensive instinct, teachers and coaches said later, was the thing that stuck with him. He was always watching before acting. He graduated from Castlemont High School in 2005 on a diploma track that carried him through with a B- average and a letter of recommendation from a counselor who described him as articulate, community-minded, and possessing strong potential for youth leadership. He enrolled at Merritt College, one of the Peralta Community College campuses in Oakland, and worked evenings at a McDonald's on MacArthur Boulevard at $7.75 an hour to cover the gas in a 1998 Honda Civic he had bought for $1,100 from a cousin. He transferred to Cal State East Bay in 2007, majored in sociology, and graduated in 2010 with a bachelor's degree and roughly $19,000 in federal student loans. He wanted to work with kids. Specifically, he wanted to work with kids who looked like the kid he had been on Bancroft Avenue. His first job out of college was as an after-school program coordinator at a small nonprofit in West Oakland, salaried at $31,000 a year. He was, by every account of that period, extraordinary at it. He knew how to talk to a 14-year-old boy who had already been arrested twice. He knew how to sit with a 13-year-old girl whose mother was on the third stint at Santa Rita Jail. He knew the streets, and he knew how to translate the streets into a language that grant writers and foundation officers could put on a spreadsheet. By 2013, he had moved to a program officer role at another Oakland youth nonprofit at $42,000. By 2015, he had climbed to a deputy director position with signatory authority on a small program budget. And in the summer of 2016, the board of the East Oakland Boxing Association, then searching for a new executive director after the retirement of its long-serving founder, offered him the top job. The salary was $68,000. The mandate was broad. Solomon accepted. He was 29 years old, and he was, on paper and in person, exactly the person a small East Oakland nonprofit board would have hired without a second thought. The East Oakland Boxing Association had been operating since the mid-1990s. It was, in the truest sense of the phrase, a shoestring operation. The gym occupied a converted warehouse space off 98th Avenue with sagging insulation, a leaky roof over the ring, and a heater that worked in 3 of the 4 winter months. Its budget, when Solomon took over, hovered around $350,000 a year. Its board was 5 volunteers, none of whom had financial or accounting expertise, most of whom held day jobs that consumed 60 hours a week, and all of whom trusted the executive director to run the day-to-day operations without micromanagement. The programming was what mattered: free after-school tutoring for kids from Castlemont, Fremont, and Havenscourt. Literacy support for elementary school students who were reading 2 grade levels behind. Boxing lessons in the afternoons, coaching for the teenagers who wanted to compete amateur. Summer programming during the months when school was out and the streets got hotter. Internship stipends for the older kids, small amounts, $300 or $400 a summer, meant to give them their first taste of a paycheck and a resume line. The money came from 3 places: a rotating cast of small foundation grants, ranging from $5,000 to $25,000 each, individual donations from Oakland residents and Bay Area philanthropists, some giving $25, some giving $5,000, and once in a great while, a large corporate or celebrity gift that would drop into the accounts and change the shape of an entire program year. All of it ran through a single set of Wells Fargo bank accounts. In September of 2016, 3 months after Solomon was hired, the board voted to add him as an authorized signatory on those accounts. The vote was unanimous. It was, in the words of one board member who later spoke with federal investigators, completely standard for a new executive director. The board did not, at that meeting, or at any meeting afterward, discuss dual signature requirements for withdrawals. They did not discuss quarterly account reviews. They did not adopt a formal expense approval protocol above a certain dollar threshold. The annual audit, when it was conducted at all in those years, was a compilation-level review by a small local CPA firm and cost the nonprofit under $2,000. Every internal check depended on the honesty of the executive director. That was the entire structure. And it was the same structure running inside thousands of small American nonprofits at that exact moment, all of them stitched together with volunteer boards, tight budgets, and a foundational assumption that the person at the top would not steal. Solomon walked into that structure with a key to every door in it. The first transfer moved on a Tuesday in the spring of 2017. Federal prosecutors would later mark it in the indictment as the earliest documented movement of EOBA funds into an account controlled personally by Howard Solomon. The amount was under $2,000. It was routed from the EOBA Wells Fargo operating account into a personal checking account Solomon held at a different bank. He did not disclose the transfer to the board. He did not enter it into the accounting software the nonprofit used for its books. It simply moved. Nothing happened. No board member called, no auditor noticed, no donor asked. The following month, another transfer moved, this one closer to $3,000. Again, nothing happened. By the end of 2017, he had moved just over $18,000 in a series of transfers structured across multiple months and multiple destination accounts. That was the year he bought the Ford Explorer. He drove it off a dealer lot in San Leandro, financed the balance through the dealership, and paid the down payment and several months of installments out of EOBA funds routed through personal accounts. 2 years later, he traded that Explorer in and drove home a Cadillac Escalade. He registered the Escalade in his own name. He parked it in the driveway of a modest East Oakland home he was still renting. The second channel began in parallel. EOBA carried a set of debit cards linked to the operating account, ostensibly for the purchase of programming supplies, snacks for the after-school kids, cleaning supplies for the gym, boxing gloves and hand wraps and speed bags. Solomon began running personal Amazon orders through those cards. A phone charger here, a pair of headphones, a small kitchen appliance. Then, over time, larger items, household electronics, furniture, clothing, bedding, a queen-size bed frame, delivered directly to the residential address he shared with no one connected to Ioba. Every purchase was logged in the nonprofit's accounting records. Solomon, or someone acting at his direction, entered the line items into the general ledger, under categories like direct program expenses, program supplies, or cleaning supplies. A person auditing the books at a glance would see a nonprofit that spent a lot of money on Amazon. A person auditing them closely would see a nonprofit that appeared to be cleaning its gym with queen-size mattresses. Nobody was auditing them closely. By the end of 2018, the running Amazon total was already in the tens of thousands of dollars. By the time federal investigators later reconstructed the ledger, the number would exceed $100,000. The third channel came in 2019. Solomon began routing charitable donations to Ioba directly into accounts he controlled, bypassing the nonprofit's Wells Fargo accounts entirely. Some donations arrived by check, made out to Ioba, and were deposited by Solomon into personal accounts through mobile check deposit or teller windows. Some arrived electronically and were rerouted at the point of receipt. The board did not track incoming donations against a public donor roll. Donors, once they wrote a check, generally did not follow up. Donations that never reached Ioba left no external footprint of their disappearance. Then in October of 2019, the largest single donation in the nonprofit's history landed in his hands. Stephen Curry and Aisha Curry had chosen Ioba as one of the recipients for a segment on The Ellen DeGeneres Show, called Ellen's Greatest Night of Giveaways. Solomon flew to Los Angeles. He sat under the studio lights. He described Ioba as an after-school program focused on keeping young folks off the streets and engaged in more holistic wellness activity, serving kids in essentially kind of the forgotten part of Oakland. He was warm and articulate, and precisely the person the segment producers had hoped to book. At the end of the taping, Curry stepped forward with a check. $50,000. He handed it to Solomon and said, "Hopefully, it goes a long way, man." Solomon flew home to Oakland, and he deposited the entire $50,000 into a personal account. He did not mention it to the board. He did not enter it into the Ioba ledger as a donation. He did not disclose it on any of the tax filings the nonprofit was required to submit. The check simply vanished from the nonprofit's institutional history and reappeared in a bank account with his name on it. By 2021, the total across all three channels, direct transfers, Amazon personal purchases, and donation capture, had crossed $500,000. There was also a vacation rental property, acquired using Ioba funds, held in an ownership structure Solomon controlled. For 5 years, no board member noticed, no auditor noticed, no donor noticed. The kids kept coming to the gym on 98th Avenue. The heater worked in 3 of the 4 winter months. The heavy bag on its chain kept swinging. The unraveling did not begin with a whistleblower. It did not begin with a board member reviewing a bank statement. It began, according to sources familiar with the federal investigative timeline, with an IRS criminal investigation referral that emerged from a routine tax examination of the year 2018. The examination flagged discrepancies between the personal income Howard Solomon had reported on his Form 1040 and the deposits appearing in the personal bank accounts registered to his name and social security number. The discrepancy was significant. It was not the kind of gap that could be explained by a forgotten gig or an undocumented cash tip. It was tens of thousands of dollars sitting in personal accounts with no corresponding entry on any tax return. That flag, on its own, would not necessarily produce a federal criminal case. Many taxpayers underreport income. Many of those cases resolve civilly with a bill, penalties, and interest. What escalated this file into IRS criminal investigation was the source of the deposits. When examiners traced them back, the deposits came, over and over again, from a Wells Fargo account belonging to a small East Oakland nonprofit. The examiner passed the file up. IRSCI opened a full investigation. The special agent in charge of the Oakland field office, Lyndon Nguyen, assigned the case internally. Agents began pulling records. They subpoenaed Ioba's Wells Fargo statements going back multiple years. They subpoenaed Solomon's personal account records at every institution the tax records touched. They pulled the Amazon business records associated with the Ioba debit cards. They interviewed board members quietly, one at a time, and every board member expressed the same reaction: complete surprise, absolute trust in the executive director, no knowledge of any account activity outside the routine. Then agents pulled the Ellen episode. They watched the segment. They watched Curry hand Solomon the check on camera. They pulled the deposit records for October 2019. They found the $50,000 sitting in a personal account with Solomon's name on it, not in the Ioba operating account, where every donor who had ever watched that segment would have assumed it went. Sources familiar with the investigation said the Ellen deposit was the moment the internal case narrative crystallized. It was the point where a paper-heavy financial fraud file became a story with a face and a moral clarity that would translate cleanly to a jury. The prosecutor assigned to the file, Assistant U.S. Attorney Thomas R. Green of the Northern District of California, began building the indictment with the assistance of Amala James and Elise Lane. Solomon was still, at that point, running Ioba. He was still, at that point, appearing at community events. He was still, at that point, sitting on panels about youth development in Oakland. He did not know the federal government had reconstructed 5 years of his conduct in forensic detail. He would find out soon enough. The investigation is done, and the case is heading toward court. If you have made it this far into the story, subscribe. We break down every detail of how the federal system actually handles small, nonprofit fraud cases, and these prosecutions rarely get the coverage they deserve. Drop a comment and tell me the moment in this case that hit hardest so far. The full scope of the federal reconstruction was built over the following period through forensic accounting work, subpoenaed banking records, and interviews with individuals who had touched Ioba's finances at any point during the relevant conduct window. When investigators finished, the picture was complete. $549,132.74. That was the aggregate figure. Every dollar accounted for, every dollar traced, every dollar attributed to a specific mechanism inside a specific channel, inside a specific year of the 5-year scheme. The Wells Fargo direct transfers came first. Multiple movements each year, ranging from small 4-figure amounts to 5-figure withdrawals. Routed from Ioba's institutional operating account into personal and business accounts Solomon controlled at other banks. Never disclosed to the board. Never entered into the nonprofit's accounting records. Never justified by an invoice, a receipt, a contract, or a memo. Then the Amazon debit card personal purchases. Over $100,000 across the conduct period. Purchases including a queen bed delivered to Solomon's home, categorized in the nonprofit's books as direct program expenses, program supplies, or cleaning supplies. Every one of those line items now sat in the government's evidence file, printed out, cross-referenced against the shipment records Amazon produced under subpoena. Then the vehicles. The Ford Explorer, purchased in 2017, later traded in. The Cadillac Escalade, acquired in the trade, registered in Solomon's own name, driven around Oakland for years, while nobody at Ioba had questioned how the executive director of a nonprofit with a $350,000 budget was moving through the city in a luxury SUV. Then the vacation rental property, acquired with Ioba funds, held in a structure that traced back, through the records agents assembled, directly to Howard Solomon. And then the $50,000 Curry donation, the single, cleanest, most morally luminous piece of evidence in the entire file. The deposit slip, the account statement, the Ellen episode, Curry's own recorded voice saying, "Hopefully, it goes a long way, man." A prosecutor could not have scripted a more devastating piece of evidence if he had written it himself. Investigators cross-referenced the accounting entries. They pulled the IRS Form 990 filings Eobia had submitted during the conduct period and noted that the $50,000 Curry donation appeared nowhere on any of them. The nonprofit had, as a matter of federal tax filing record, never received the money at all. That falsification of the 990 was, on its own, a separate potential federal exposure. But by then, the mail fraud and tax evasion counts were the cleanest path to indictment, and prosecutors moved on those. Board members were briefed as the case moved toward indictment. Their reactions, according to individuals present, were uniform: devastation, anger, shame. One board member reportedly asked whether the kids would ever know. Another asked whether the gym would survive. Both questions would remain open for months. The indictment came down. 2 counts: mail fraud, tax evasion for the 2018 tax year. On April 23, 2025, Solomon walked into federal court in Oakland and pleaded guilty to both. The moment federal agents actually approached Howard Solomon was not dramatic in the way people expect. There were no flashing lights and no armored vehicles. It was a morning in Oakland. 2 IRS CI special agents in plain clothes, credentials clipped to their belts, waiting at a location Solomon frequented. Sources with knowledge of the encounter described it as brief and businesslike. The agents identified themselves. They told him they were with IRS criminal investigation. They told him they had been looking into his personal tax filings for the year 2018 and into related financial matters connected to the East Oakland Boxing Association. They asked whether he would be willing to speak with them. Solomon, according to accounts of the encounter, went very still. "About what specifically?" he said. "About Eoba's bank accounts," one of the agents replied. "About some deposits into accounts registered to you. About a donation from October of 2019. There was a pause. According to those familiar with the exchange, Solomon's face did not change. His hands remained at his sides. His posture did not shift. But his voice, when it came back, was lower. "I want to talk to a lawyer before I say anything else." The agents nodded. They handed him a card. They told him his attorney could contact the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of California, and they provided the name of Assistant U.S. Attorney Thomas R. Green. They told him the investigation had been ongoing for some time. They told him the government was prepared to move forward with or without his cooperation. And then they left him standing there. Solomon did not return to Eoba that day. He did not return the day after either. Within a matter of weeks, through counsel, he was in negotiations toward the plea he would enter that following April. The sentencing hearing was held on September 24, 2025, in a courtroom on the ground floor of the Ronald V. Dellums Federal Building in downtown Oakland. U.S. District Judge Yvonne Gonzalez Rogers presided. Assistant U.S. Attorney Thomas R. Green sat at the government's table, flanked by trial support attorneys Amala James and Alice Lane. Howard Solomon sat at the defense table in a dark suit, his hands folded in front of him. The government's sentencing memorandum walked the court through the full architecture of the fraud. The 5 years of conduct, the $549,000 in aggregate embezzlement, the Amazon debit card scheme, the vehicles, the vacation rental property, and, threaded through the entire memo like a spine, the $50,000 Curry donation. The most publicly visible act of philanthropy in Eoba's institutional history, deposited entirely into a personal account. IRS CI. Special Agent in Charge, Lyndon Nguyen, submitted a statement that would be read into the sentencing record. Solomon's embezzlement scheme not only victimized the East Oakland Boxing Association, Nguyen wrote, but also deprived low-income, high-risk children in East Oakland of the internships, mentoring, and boxing programs the organization offers. While Mr. Solomon siphoned funds from a non-profit to serve his own greed, IRS CI agents expertly sifted through evidence and followed the money in pursuit of justice. A representative of Eoba's board addressed the court. The statement was measured. It described the months following Solomon's departure as the hardest institutional period in the nonprofit's more than 2-decade history. It described program cuts. It described emergency fundraising outreach to donors who had lost trust. It described the difficulty of explaining to a 14-year-old boxer why the summer internship stipend program was suspended. It did not name Solomon directly. It did not need to. Judge Gonzalez-Rogers issued her sentence: 27 months in federal prison, restitution to Ioba in the amount of $549,132.74, additional restitution to the Internal Revenue Service in the amount of $287,185 for the tax evasion count, supervised release to follow the custodial term. In her remarks from the bench, Judge Gonzalez-Rogers addressed the moral center of the case. She spoke about the trust that a nonprofit executive director holds. She spoke about the specific children whose programming had been degraded by the theft. She spoke about the $50,000 donation and about the fact that the donors, on national television, had explicitly named the population the money was meant to reach. And she spoke about the length of time the conduct had continued. 5 years, she noted, was not an error. 5 years was a choice, repeated. Solomon was designated to a low-security federal facility to serve the 27-month term. Ioba, at the time of this recording, was still operating. The gym on 98th Avenue was still open. The kids kept coming. The heavy bag on its chain kept swinging. But the trust that had held that building together for 2 decades had been broken by the one person who was hired to protect it. That case was hard to sit with. But the case on the right-hand side of your screen right now might be even worse. Click it and see for yourself.